Welcome to Jesus and Jiu-Jitsu podcast, episode 082. My name is Lucas Pinckard, and I'm here with
Isaac Tauaefa.
Good morning, Pumpkin.
Morning, buddy.
It's an early one for us this morning. That's why my voice sounds so rich.
Rich.
Yeah.
Mine just sounds like I'm losing it.
Well, yeah. I haven't. What I've determined is that my voice sounds deeper before I brush my teeth. So since I knew we were having this podcast, I still got the film on there.
Thank you.
That I could really make sure.
Really appreciate that.
I want to bring it to the listeners this morning on episode 082.
Someone needs to spray that mic down.
Yeah.
We're done with this.
Just sanitize the whole thing.
Yeah,
so let's get kicked off. Quick shout out to the folks over at Jocko Fuel.
Mm-hmm.
Get your clean supplements at jockofuel.com. We've got the Go Energy drinks if you're watching us online on the YouTubes. If you're not, you should be. What is it? What are you using from them right now? Your krill oil, right?
Yeah, I ran out recently, but vitamin D3 for sure.
Yeah, the krill oil, the D3,
joint warfare.
Joint warfare.
Yep.
We've got the white tea, the pomegranate white tea, staple at our house.
Yep.
So good.
Creatine.
Yeah, and then I've started using the pre-workout, not the Discipline, not like the jar of Discipline Go, but there are other pre-workouts got a little more stimmies in it.
Oh, yeah.
Which helps me out, which I really enjoy. So go check it out. Use code JJJ10 to save you 10%. Sign up for their text messages and stuff because they just had a deal where like you spent I think $125, they would give you a $15 gift card, and then you got the JJJ discount on top of it. So JJJ10 saves you 10% on there, and all the proceeds from that go to, all the money you save goes to the ministry.
Yes.
You ready to crack these bad boys open? Let's do it.
Needed that. Need something this morning. I've already had some caffeine, you know.
I was going to do a sommelier review.
Okay.
Talk about how it splashed over the...
Go ahead.
No, I'm
You're reviewing.
No, you ruined
blue
it.
raspberry flavoring.
You ruined it with your talk of you've already had caffeine this
Is that
morning.
natural blue raspberry flavor?
Yes, it is. It is picked from only the finest blue raspberries. Speaking of caffeine, we found that was given years ago this countertop espresso maker, right? From the company's called like La Pavoni. A friend of mine got it and found it on sale at like a Bed Bath & Beyond or something, and it was like $200. He got it and he never figured out how to use it, so he gave it to us. It's like an $1,800 espresso, like countertop espresso and latte machine. So I spent the weekend kind of tinkering with it and figuring some stuff out with the Jesus and Jiu-Jitsu coffee.
Oh, yeah.
If you, we got the ratios right. We don't have to put any flavoring or anything in it, and it tastes like chocolate.
Oh,
it's freaking awesome.
So
I started experimenting with my own. You ever made like simple syrup?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
So I made some raspberry and some blueberry simple syrup, and then popped it in there to give the coffee, give the latte a little bit of flavoring.
I never thought about having like a fruit.
We're definitely gonna have a third kid. So Kirsten,
you know what to do with all this extra energy?
No. Kirsten's a big fan of the lattes. So I think as long
that
as
much of a fan, that's legit.
I think as long as I get as I keep this up, the things are gonna go well there. So,
praise God.
Yeah, for sure. But it's been this really cool like little experiment getting to do that stuff because that coffee, which we do sell on the website JesusandJujitsuUSA.com, with our partnership with Above Coffee, that coffee is really, really versatile. We found. Yeah. So it's great with a pour over. It's good. We've been drinking it up here at church. It's just like our regular Sunday morning coffee, which is cool. And it's one of those things where like the folks at church get behind it because they're like, oh, it's coffee with a purpose, right? It's cheesy as that may sound, like it's neat in that regard. And then also just doing it the different ways at home and this week.
That makes me happy to hear from you.
The espresso, it's really nice.
I was saying from you, it's good to know from you, from a coffee
snob.
Yeah. Because it is. I mean, we're putting our name on it. It wasn't just like we, got some, I don't know, some cheapo coffee from somewhere and slapped a sticker on it. It was an actual partnership with a real legitimate coffee company selling high altitude Brazilian coffee, and so. Really amazing to have the opportunity to partner with Above Coffee and get that out to people.
Yeah, man.
And it's a legit product. So y'all go order that. Go check that out.
Go check it out, and it's reasonably priced.
Yeah.
Right, for a specialty coffee, it's really
Yeah.
really good on the pricing. I think it's 10 ounces for like $15. So
Yep.
it's not bad. What have we got for sponsors today?
Yeah, so
as my mouth gets like 6 steps ahead of my brain this morning.
I'm living 6 steps ahead of my brain.
What have we got for sponsors?
So the sponsor for today's episode is a guy named Gabe Bodding. He is a 21-year-old road welder in Ontario, Canada.
Okay.
Dude's a stud. I've been talking to him on the social media page some.
Nice.
And it's just cool to hear. I mean, he's got his life. He's just got his head on straight, and he's pursuing the Lord. He's 21, but he's married. He and his wife have a beautiful little 9, almost 10-month-old baby girl. And so, anyway, they just bought their first house, and he's getting his finances in order. And so, what the conversation I had with him online was like, hey, we're trying to honor God with our finances. We're trying to like set our sights on the future. We're saving money. We're paying our mortgage, all this stuff. But one of the things that we would like to do, because this podcast has benefited my life and has helped me be a better husband and father, because of what you guys talk about on the podcast. And so because of that, he was like, man, I just want to be able to sponsor an episode and just say thank you. He didn't ask for any credit. But I just wanted to give Gabe a shout out, Gabe and his wife, and just say thank you to both of you. And God bless you guys. God bless your daughter and your business and your new home. So that's really cool, man.
I wonder
and
where
love those
in
stories.
Ontario.
I don't know.
Because like when I was working in Thunder Bay, that's in Ontario, but so is Toronto's also in Ontario.
He
and they're like
sent me the name of
opposite
his
sides of
welding company,
Lake
but
Superior.
Sounds like he travels,
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean that makes sense.
Yeah.
Because the roadways there are insane.
Yeah.
Just because the amount of snow that they get.
Oh yeah.
Right. So the conditions are ever changing up on the Canadian roadways.
Yeah.
So that's wild.
Well, thanks, Gabe.
Yeah.
And God bless you guys. What a cool...
and stay warm, because it's coming up on the frigid season.
Yeah.
In Ontario. Yeah. It'll go, but at least my experience whenever I was there, we had several days that were like, I don't know, 30 degrees Celsius. So whatever that is, like mid 80s, right? Things were super nice. It was quite wonderful. Like it's probably like mid 80s to 90s. And then all of a sudden, one day you woke up and there was the 12 inches of snow on the ground, and it was like 15 degrees Fahrenheit. It's like, what's happening? They're like, oh, it's the first snow. I was like, yesterday I was wearing shorts, and today I don't want to go outside. I'm like, no, you'll get used to it.
I love the cold, man. I look forward to it every year.
It's a different cold up there, though.
I'm sure.
Like minus 60 is not regular cold.
Yeah, no. I mean, I'm down for some Canadian cold. Like I like the cold a lot. Yeah, I like having a reason for your house to be like a warm retreat from outside. You know,
makes sense.
Fireplace and all that stuff. Because if it's kind of a mild winter, like how a lot of times it is down here, it's just like not that cold. It's, I don't know.
Yeah,
I feel like
you can still wear a hoodie and some sweatpants and get away with it.
Yeah.
Yeah. There you can't. There will be days where they're like, don't go outside. It's too cold to live.
Yeah, my brother Josh lived in Minnesota.
Yeah, pretty similar climate.
Yeah.
Yep.
And he, of course, went up there completely unprepared for the winter when he was in college.
He was just wearing his lava around in February.
No, he was wearing regular sweats for the coldest winter on record in the last 40 years or something.
He was up in Minnesota when I was in Canada. Yeah, we were just a few hours from each other.
That was a cold time of
Josh's life.
Yeah, of that area of the world.
Yeah, it was quite frigid.
This reminds me of my wife and I were cracking up the other day about that we saw this clip of this couple, and the caption was, when you finally have time together without the kids. And there was this people sitting down for dinner, like a date night or something, and they're just kind of like looking around, and the wife was like, so do you like weather? And it was like, we say that sometimes when we literally, after we get the kids down and we're just sitting there and we're zonked and we're just like, we're trying to keep our eyes open for 30 minutes so we can get some quality time together before we go to sleep, and we'll just hit each other with the So, do you like
Do you
weather?
like weather?
Yeah.
Yeah, it is a weird thing, man, because after kids, the Venn diagrams of commonality change so much, right? Because there is a point where the thing you have most in common is your children, which I know that's one of the reasons people are so intentional about saying, like, hey, you have to date your spouse, right, continually, because you change and you don't want to lose that connection. But there are certain times where you're like, I want to talk about anything other than the kids right now because they're frustrating or whatever, and you're just sitting there and you're like, well, yeah. And you've got all of this mental fatigue.
Oh yeah.
That everything's just like wiped clean. That I know both of us with young kids still. That's a challenge, man, because they're so dependent upon us still for everything.
Yeah, having that when I know it's a season, it's like it's not going to be like that forever, but it's hard, man. It's hard to it's hard to connect. Like when you're like you said, you're kind of in this season where things are so busy. You're really not getting much sleep. You're probably getting less sleep than we are right now. My 2-year-old is just, I don't know what's going on with her right now. She's just waking up in the middle of the night and all this, but, being exhausted. It's like I have to be extra intentional with spending time with my wife. Like not just sitting close to each other watching TV. Like, although sometimes that is quality time for some people, but I've realized that with my wife, we need time to just kind of talk about whatever. Doesn't have to be anything heavy or deep. Just purposeful talking, like purposeful shutting other stuff off and just giving her my attention. And that usually fills our tank. But man, it's hard sometimes because we get there and she's like, she'll be like, hey, so like, come talk to me. And I'll sit down and it'll just be quiet and like, what do you want to talk about? She's like, I don't know. I mean,
you got a topic wheel or something over there, woman? You want to talk? Yeah.
I do need like a little deck of cards or something because neither of our brains are working. Oh, do you? Really?
Yeah, we do. We have, it was something that we got before we got married.
Yeah.
And yeah, so we have one. I think it's a couple of $100 cards and you can buy like little expansions for it. But it's questions that are like, hey, so, what was your most embarrassing moment from junior high?
Oh, that's
right?
great.
And, it's got just random stuff like that. What's the worst meal you've ever had? There's all these like crazy things like that are when Kirsten and I are stuck. That's it. I'll have to get the name off the box, but it's phenomenal, and we've given it as a
great gift
to people.
Well,
like, what am I going to do with this? It's like, trust us.
Well, and it's funny because
what you're going to do with it is freaking use it.
I hear that and I'm like, part of your brain is kind of like, how lame is that you need help figuring out something to talk about? And then I'm in this season where I'm like, literally, we'd both be content to just sit there and just like in the silence and just slowly drift off to sleep and not actually
have a conversation.
Yeah. So that's a huge help. Like that would be really cool. Yeah. I need to borrow that or go to Amazon and figure it out.
Yeah, we'll get you one. It has been way more useful than we thought it was going to be. Like at first it was just kind of like a fun thing. It's like, we'll ask each other a random question before we go to bed. And now it's like, I can't even. And then you pull a card out and you're like, oh, you know what? Actually, I do. I got a really,
well, just those two questions you asked,
like whatever, right?
Yeah.
So
just those two you just asked right now. I was like, I would be interested to hear like my wife's story from middle school or worst meal or whatever.
Yeah. There was one about how do you think your childhood self would react to what you're doing now? I was like, I don't even want to know. Like which part of my childhood self?
Yeah, exactly.
Like, so many things changed. Yeah, but that's also the reason that Kirsten and I, and we've talked about this a few times, we did the Marriage on the Rock, the Jimmy Evans 52-week devotion thing.
Sweet.
That's on the Bible app. We just wrapped that up. It was a ton of fun, man, because the questions that are in there when you get to the end are really deep. They're really deep. They're not deep in the sense that like they're designed to be, super deep and thoughtful questions. Those questions are designed to make you have a conversation with your spouse about like whatever it is. So
what's it called?
It's Marriage on the Rock is what the name of the ministry is. But if you look up on the Bible app, if you go on the YouVersion Bible app, if you go to plans and you look up Jimmy Evans, his stuff pops up there, and it's a 52-week thing. It's we did it, and I think we missed like a couple of weeks, but we finished it in a little over a year. But it was absolutely phenomenal, and one of the reasons why is because, you know, when it was talking about like finances or things like that, there were some very pointed questions of like, when are you going to have your financial meeting? And that's how there's a talk it out part and then like a walk it out.
Yeah.
One of the big things for us is he talked about doing a vision retreat, like going and like setting goals for your marriage, which seems, and on the one hand, it seems like it takes all the romance out of the marriage, because you're like, what do you mean I have goals for my marriage? Like, what are you talking about? But they're really like things you want to see your family do or accomplish, or, you know, setting, I guess, kind of like vision for your family, right? Like we do it for our companies. Our company is going to be a company that, you know, we do X, Y, and Z, or we've done it for the ministry, right? Jesus and Jiu-Jitsu is going to be an organization that, you know, builds people up, that's gospel centered, you know, that uses Jiu-Jitsu as a conduit to preach the gospel, like those types of things. But we don't do that for our marriages and our families because we think it like takes some of the romance out of it or whatever. But how important is it to have those kinds of things for your families to instill in your kids and that kind of stuff? So it talks about doing some things like that, and then a lot of just practical day-to-day stuff. There's a lot of date night things that are in there. And so Kirsten and I, even though we don't right now have the ability to like go out once a week.
Yeah, same.
We've picked a night of the week, and that night is that's kind of like our sacred night, where we're doing in-home dates. And
yeah, that's nice.
Like making a little meal or a dessert, and, you know, she'll do one, I'll do one, or we'll do it. So we're playing games, or sometimes it's watching a movie, sometimes it's catching a little workout together, like whatever that is, and just making that time like specific and intentional for us. It's been a really cool thing.
Yeah, I love that. I got to be more purposeful with that, because this season is just like insanely busy, you know, and Kim works in the evenings. So, you know, I take over dad duty, or take over parent duty from the late afternoon on, and putting them to bed and all that. So it can be kind of tough, because when she gets home, there's not a whole lot of time between that and when we go to bed. And so it's like, you got to fit something in that's meaningful, maybe.
Right.
Or just be exhausted.
Yeah,
and
just fall asleep together on the couch.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I want to hop into a scripture. We've been doing a thing at our church. Our church is it's, I would say it was smaller, but it's about an average sized church. We've got around 80 folks that come on Sunday mornings. Sometimes we'll push up into 100, and sometimes we'll dip down into 60s. But it's an average sized church for most churches in the United States, and it's a really good, fun fellowship. But we give to a lot of other organizations. One of which is the Denton Baptist Association, which is a group of churches in our county that we work together in order to plant new churches, right? The Village is a part of it.
Yep.
The Village is a part of it. We've got our church, obviously, that's a part of it. First Baptist Denton. Yeah. Several others that are Grace Point, where you used to go, they're a part of it.
Yeah.
So.
Oh, that's right.
Yeah.
I saw you
so
there.
we all work together and pull money together to help start new church plants.
Yeah.
And sometimes those will be within the county, or sometimes they're people from the county that are planting in other areas. It could be local, or it could be they're preparing for something in another spot of the nation or internationally. And so one of the things that we've been able to do, because we don't have a ton of like extra resources, we don't have a huge, you know, volunteer base. We don't have a bunch of people that are like, oh, I feel called to ministry and I feel called to church plant and that kind of thing. But there's a lot of like young people that are church planting, or people who are, you know, in that next phase of ministry, that are are lacking reps,
Yeah.
right? Because I would say the majority of planting pastors, they go from preaching a couple of times a year to every Sunday, just like that, right? It's things are going well, and then there's a Sunday where the church launches, and they went from, oh, last year I preached 3 sermons to like this year I'm responsible for 52.
Yeah.
Right. If I'm preaching every Sunday. But a lot of them are in the same boat that I'm at. You're preaching every Sunday, you're teaching every Wednesday night, right? So now you're not just responsible for 52 weeks of this stuff, but you got to do it twice a week. Pastors who are doing Sunday night stuff, well, now they've got 3 a week that they're doing.
Yeah.
And so there's a lot to it, and they really get thrown into it. And the same thing with the worship teams is the worship teams have even less frequent opportunities to really like ply their craft. And so one of the things that we've done is we've taken the 5th Sundays, which happens every quarter, right? You have a 5th Sunday. We've taken those 5th Sundays and we've turned them into church takeover days. So yesterday we had the people from a church that's getting planted called Via Church. It's spelled VIA. I've been calling it Via Church for like the last 2 months.
Until you met someone from there.
Yeah, so like the pastor and I've been talking, and we've only texted the name of the church.
Yeah.
Like he sent me their promo materials and all that stuff. But we never, said the name of the church until he was there, and I was like, hey, by the way, I want to make sure I'm pronouncing this the right way. Is it Via Church? And he goes, oh, it's Via Church. Oh. And immediately I was like, that's stupid. But
yes,
it's a church plant that is designed to reach students at college campuses, and so that's the reason that it's called cool. That. Yeah, it's a model called a sending model. So the idea is, like at college campuses, there's kind of like this bottleneck where people come in and then they either grow spiritually or they don't. But most of the churches that are looking to minister to college students are churches that like have college ministry as like a thing that they do on the side. And then that's it. Well, this church model is designed to take in, disciple people for, between 3 and 6 years, because that's how long you're going to have the college students, and equip them and send them out so that they're ready to be ministers, not like necessarily vocational ministers, but they're ready to be ministers of the gospel wherever they end up.
Yeah.
And particularly in Dallas, around like the University of Texas at Dallas, the amount of international students that are there is unbelievable, particularly in South Korea, India. You get a lot of students from there that take advantage of the programs that are offered at UTD and that are sent out. So it was really cool. So they brought their worship team who just started kind of rehearsing together. They hadn't actually led worship together before. So at our church yesterday was the first time that they led worship together, cool. Which was super cool. And there was literally from all over the world, is that we're trying to figure out on the live stream. And one of the guys like, oh, my family wants to watch from Israel, and my family wants to watch from India, and some from South Korea, and another guy's like, my family wants to watch from Fort Worth. And I was like, oh, cool. And he's like, yeah, it feels lame. And I was like, no, Fort Worth is kind of like a different country from Dallas some days. So that was really great. But Pastor John delivered this message yesterday about it was from the book of James, which we've spent a lot of time in. And he was talking particularly about verses 13 through 18 in James chapter 1. And I'll just read it real quick. It says, no one undergoing a trial should say, I am being tempted by God, since God is not tempted by evil, and he himself doesn't tempt anyone. But each person is tempted when he is drawn away and enticed by his own evil desires. Then after desire has conceived, it gives birth to sin, and when sin is fully grown, it gives birth to death. Don't be deceived, my dear brothers and sisters, for every good and perfect gift is from above, coming down from the Father of lights, who does not change like shifting shadows. By his own choice, he gave us birth by the word of truth, so that we would be a kind of first fruits of his creatures. So there are two things that really stuck out to me. One is this idea that God doesn't change, which there's a lot of people who are like, oh, well, everybody changes over time. And this was this sort of like epiphany. It's in my personal study. I'm doing a lot of study in Genesis. And God exists outside of time, space, and matter.
Yep.
So because he exists outside of time, space, and matter, change for him over time is impossible because he doesn't experience time.
Yeah. Yeah.
That was kind of like the light bulb that went off. Is like all of us change over time because we experience time. We grow, we get older, all of those kinds of things. God is not, he doesn't experience time because he exists outside of time.
Yeah.
So therefore, it would be impossible for him to change because he exists outside of those barriers.
I was listening to somebody talk on social media about about God being outside of time, which he is, but because of that, him able to, I mean, they were using it as kind of a thing to not harmonize, but explain how, like, classic view of predestination versus free will, like how both of those things are possible at the same time, and he was using that as a justification. But just the whole concept was interesting about God being outside of time and being able to look at the past, the present, and the future, like all at once, all existing in front of him at the same time. But it also is just the concept again of God being outside of all of those things is hard to wrap your brain around.
Yeah, did you ever watch the Marvel series? And I know JP just turned us off. Did you ever watch the Marvel cartoon series What If?
No.
So it's one of their more recent animated things that they've done, and one of the ideas with What If is that there's this guy named Uatu, and Uatu is he's a watcher. And the Watchers in the Marvel Universe aren't supposed to interfere with anything that happens there, but they exist outside of time, space, and matter and watch everything that's happening in all the multiverses all the time. And obviously they are God-like figures. They're incredibly powerful, which is why they're not supposed to intervene. But if you want sort of a very elementary level like explanation or idea of what we're talking about, that series kind of gives it in that character, is that he can see everything that's going on, and he watches everything that's happening in all the multiverses, and sort of is your story narrator through a lot of it, and he's not supposed to interfere. But like that's the whole thing, is that he exists outside of time, space, and matter, and sort of this realm between realms kind of thing. So it's interesting that, even in our like pop culture, not only do we see that this is possible, but we also see the necessity of a being that does this. And you have something kind of like this in just about every major science fiction or fantasy universe, is some type of something that exists outside of time, space, and matter. And the reason that I point out that it happens in the sci-fi and the fantasy stuff is because in those two genres in particular of fiction, those are the ones where we are allowed the most freedom to just talk about like the things that are happening within our souls and trying to find ways to explain it. And nearly every one of them has some sort of being or entity or something that lives in this kind of space and leads and guides things, which, guys like Heiser or Brian Godawa or J. Warner Wallace or some of these great apologists would point to that and say, that's evidence that we are looking for the transcendent because our soul is crying out for it, and that we have to, inevitably, when we deny God, we have to take this part of us and deny that it exists in order for that to happen. So, yeah, so that was my one sort of epiphany there. But one of the things that Pastor John did that I thought was really interesting was he looked at verses 13 through 15 and broke down the anatomy of sin. And so I'd never heard it said quite like that. And as we were going through it, I'm taking my notes that when we look at how sin takes a hold of us in our lives, that there's this really fine balance. And we've talked about it before, that there is this idea that all sin, because we are fallen and we have a sinful nature, that all sin originates in us, and that it's 100% the responsibility of man. We have to claim and own every sin that we make, and that there are no outside influences that cause us to sin at all. One extreme thought of it. And the opposite is that we are not responsible for any of the sins that we actually did, because essentially like the devil made us do it, right? That everything is so spiritually influenced that we're absolved from the responsibility of all of it. And that's why it's so easy for God to forgive us, because we're powerless to, the temptations of the enemy. And the truth is really somewhere in the middle, right? If we deny the existence of the enemy, or if we deny the existence of the spiritual realm and the principalities and things that are fighting over us, then we have to ignore large portions of the Bible which say exactly that. Like, our struggle is not against flesh and blood, but against, the rulers, the principalities, and those kinds of things.
Yeah.
So we have to deny all of that if we lean too heavily in one direction. But going the other way, we have to deny, if the devil made us do everything, we have to deny that we have any responsibility of it at all, and that like some of the desires that we have are just simply because we're sinful creatures. So I really like the way that he broke this down with the anatomy of sin, and the way that it starts there. The first is that no one undergoing a trial should say, I am being tempted by God, since God is not tempted by evil, and he himself doesn't tempt anyone. Starting off there, like, there are certainly times where God tests people, but that he never tempts people. And so I'm curious for you, because I feel like both of us have been through trials in our lives, right? We've experienced different kinds of hardships, or been put in situations that were definitely designed to increase our faith, even though we may not have seen it at the time. Right, we might have just been frustrated that we were in that situation, right? So what do you think the difference between a temptation and a trial is? Because this is something that's I struggle with defining. Yeah. Because people are like, oh, God, God's never going to tempt you. Well, then why did he put me in this situation? And I'm like, I don't know. So that you would stop sucking so much? Like, that's, which is not a very pastoral response oftentimes.
Well, I think, I guess I have a different... The way that I think about it, and this is just where I've arrived after just years of studying and listening and thinking, I feel like God doesn't... Well, I'm not going to say God doesn't test you, because we know that he does.
Oh, for sure.
Scripture.
Yeah.
But I'd say that the test seems to be not like maybe a God-initiated thing, as much as it is like a God... And we're getting into kind of... some people will be screaming at their radio right now, but God allowing things to happen, God allowing for trials to take place. I mean, when we look at Job, it wasn't God's idea to have that happen, but he allowed it because he allowed Job to be tested. So I think in that way, it's like, well, it was the enemy is trying to bring this calamity or hardship on me, and God is allowing me to be tested through that,
right?
And be refined, because he has his plans and purposes for me. And we know that, I mean, James says it in the beginning here, count it all joy when you face trials of various kinds.
Yeah.
Know that the testing of your faith produces steadfastness. Let steadfastness have its full effect, that you may be perfect and complete, lacking in nothing. And so I'd say, that's kind of laying that foundation of God allowing us to be tested. And I'd say that, well, my understanding of the whole, just the deception part, like there are external factors to your temptation. There are things that come about outside of yourself that have, an allure, like they can draw you into temptation. But there's something in you that wants to respond that way.
Yeah.
So your fleshly desire, which is what James talks about here, was in verse 14. 14. But each person is tempted when he is lured and enticed by his own desire.
Yeah.
That's an interesting illustration, like, or depiction of what's going on, that we're led by our own evil desires. So I don't understand how that works. Like, I mean, I know that because we are born of flesh, we have a sin nature.
Yeah.
And I don't think, I mean, and there's some people that subscribe to this idea that you can be perfect this side of heaven, like empowered by the Holy Spirit, equipped. Like, and it says, I mean, James 1 does say perfect and complete, lacking in nothing.
Yeah.
I don't know how that's possible to be perfect this side of heaven. But from experience, I'll say there are things in you that call out, like your sin nature does lead you to partake in something. So there might be a external influence for sin, but there's something in you that responds to that external influence that causes you to sin.
Yeah.
And so, I say me, causes me to sin. And so, that thing, that fleshly desire, that thing in you, in me, requires like constant like trimming back, like constant, like I cannot allow it to grow in darkness. I have to be vigilant about hacking it back to nothing,
Right.
Because if you're not being vigilant with that, then it starts to lead. It starts to have more ability to kind of connect and respond to that external temptation and make it easier for you to fall into sin. This was interesting because I had a conversation with JP at our kind of internal discipleship thing we were doing, and JP's definitely in the camp, and Steven and look, a lot of our pursuit friends, we talk about kind of spiritual matters and how people are tempted, by
Right.
spirits. And, and the Bible's clear about principalities and
this is it's not, and that's the things about striking the balance, right? Is because the Bible talks about both of these things, I would say, in equal parts. And it's easy in given situations to lean one way or the other.
Yes. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And what my experience has been is that when I'm counseling people, when it's their sin, the devil made them do it.
Yeah.
When somebody else sins, it's because they're a bad person.
100% personal
right? They're like,
agency.
they're like, that's kind of the way that we end up, is that like, no, the enemy's just on me. I'm being tempted.
Yeah.
And it's, there's a comedian, I forget his name, but he's tall black guy, always wears a bow tie, hilarious Christian comedian. And he talks about how, there's this thing that people are like, oh, the devil be busy all the time, right? And he goes, I had a buddy, and he was like, I called you, and it says, he's like, and I couldn't get a hold of you. He's like, yeah, man, the devil is busy. And he's like, no, you didn't pay your phone bill. like that's what the devil. I don't think the devil works for Verizon. Right. Is kind of and I just butchered his joke, but that's the premise of it. And there is so much of it that is like that. That in our own lives, we want to write it off almost and say, hey, no, this doesn't happen to me. Right? Like my relationship with God is strong enough that this doesn't happen to me, but I am, it's the enemy that's tempting me to do this. It's the enemy that's at work in my life. And while that may be true, what we have to evaluate is like if I'm going to say those things about me, I often don't extend that grace to other people. That when I see them do something wrong, I'm like, nope, it's because that person got taken away by their own evil desires and have done these things.
It was in them.
They're a sinner. I'm in a struggle with principalities because I'm holy and the enemy wants me so bad.
Dude, that's and that's kind of the conversation, that's where the conversation led in this group and just talking a lot about that. But just to your point about like, dude, it's not, sometimes some of these things are not spiritual attacks. It's just a serious lack of discipline and personal responsibility.
Yeah, for sure.
You and sometimes they are spiritual attacks, and you can't be so ignorant to those things that you allow them to influence your life, and that kind of spiritual like oppression to settle on you because you're like you said, too far one way or the other, and you dismiss that this stuff even exists. Well, those people are oppressed. And then, like you said, people that would just make everything spiritual and have no personal responsibility in any of these things. Both are perversions. Both are hurtful to your walk and to your faith and to your life, like having your responsibilities, in life. So, I think that's a good. I'm glad you came up on this.
I think most of the time that it's a both and that's why for me this really stuck out is like a recognition of like what the anatomy of a sin is.
Yeah, I want to hear about that.
So that whether it is our own evil desires, whether it's an influence of the enemy, or whether it's both.
Yeah.
Right. Whether it's something that like, then the enemy is after us and knows where that weak spot is. If you've ever read the Screw Tape Letters, I think C.S. Lewis has some great insight into what that looks like. Unfortunate as it is, and creepy as that book is,
it is.
Right? It's so good. Well, so one of the things I love so much before we hop into to really defining the anatomy of it, one of the things I love so much about my study Bible is that I get all of these like crazy notes, and I say crazy notes, these very helpful and intentional notes that are written in here. They've got the cross references and things that are in the center. And so if you've got a good study Bible, this is one of the really wonderful things about it. So as I'm struggling to kind of flesh out the like, all right, so it does say no one undergoing a trial because I'm not tempted, but God tests people. What does that really look like? I've got this reference to check out Genesis 22:1. That while God does not put people under, or while God does put people under trial or a period of testing, he will never tempt anyone to sin. Okay, interesting. So what is Genesis 22:1? After these things, God tested Abraham and said to him, Abraham, here I am, he answered. Okay, so God is testing Abraham. Well, what is he testing Abraham for? Well, in in chapter 21, Isaac is born.
Yeah.
In chapter 22, God says, go sacrifice your son.
Yeah.
Like that's the test. It's so often the tests that God puts us through are about black and white obedience and not about ambiguity. They're not gray areas where we're having to decide or make these crazy moral decisions. It's God telling us quite directly or giving us clear direction, whether through his word or through the prompting of the Holy Spirit, like this is what I need you to do, and obey or disobey. And it's a lot more clear cut than how we look at temptation. Like God is not sending the lusty co-ed to us, whatever that looks like in our life, to see whether or not we're going to,
I see.
Fault in our marriage or something like that, because that's not what's going to give him glory. Mm-hmm. But those trials and those trials that we end up with, not using the word temptations, those trials that we end up with, those periods of testing are often very black and white of, one of the ones for my wife and I was, are we going to trust God enough to up our giving a little bit because that's what we feel like the Lord wants us to do? That's a obey or disobey.
Yeah.
And that's when it comes to like this testing of the faith. With this stuff, with both of us had the experience with our kids in the NICU, right? That's are we going to trust God to be sovereign, to be in control in this situation? Then that's a testing of our faith. But it's clearly defined what the terms are in these tests.
Yeah.
Whereas, temptation, it's not like that. Right? Like in the midst of a trial, I might be tempted to go do something. Like I might be tempted to be angry with God or to deny God's sovereignty or whatever, because I see the things that are happening, with my kid being sick or the troubles that are happening in the world, or I'm upset with a political situation. And so now all of a sudden, like I've got all this fury and rage against God, and that leads me into temptation. Those things come from a combination of allowing the enemy to work because we've created distance between ourselves and God, and then being dragged away by our own sinful desires. And so it's a combination of a lot of things. It's not a test from God. It's not a temptation from God, because God's trials and temptations are much more black and white.
Yeah. Well, and then that makes me think about just kind of the way that I was defining or laying out the temptation thing. I mean, obviously, like you said there, he directly tested Abraham.
Yeah.
So
Do this.
yeah,
Right?
do this. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I guess maybe my, the way I was talking about it had to do with the temptation part.
Yeah.
Like the enemy's bringing that. That might be a part of a test,
Sure.
but God is not tempting you. He
Yeah,
does
because
not
I think
tempt you.
Job is a great example because God allows that to happen.
Yeah.
Right? But even when we look at Job, there's nothing like the temptation for Job is to deny God
Yes.
because of his situation
Yeah. Yep.
instead of honor God as sovereign.
Yes.
Like those are, when we look at the trials and the tests that we're put through that God allows,
Yeah.
they always put us in a position to deny God's sovereignty
Yeah.
instead of to make a decision which is going to damage our families and our relationships and those kinds of things.
Yeah, that's a good
So-
point. Yeah. So I think the
It's a
temptation
weird
is-
thing,
yeah.
kind of there. Because on the
Yep.
one level, it is semantics, but on the other, we, especially as parents, we can relate to that. Like I want to put my son and my boys in difficult situations, right? I want them to test themselves. I want them to test their own mettle. And to an extent, there are things that I allow my 2-year-old to do that push the bounds of whether or not he trusts me enough in a given situation, right? Like, we're going for a walk. Do you want to ride on daddy's shoulders? Well, that may not seem like a big deal. It is the first few times you do it,
Yeah.
right? Because especially the little kids, man, they're panicky,
Oh man.
and
You're
there's
ripping your eyeballs out.
yeah, for
'cause they
sure,
think they're gonna
right?
fall back.
Yeah, using your beard as reins, right? So there's all of these kinds of things that are part of those tests of trust that we recognize big and small in those areas, but we often don't see them in our lives that way. Because we lean more, I think, particularly in our culture today, into these gray areas of ambiguity, where we like to live in the gray area. Mm-hmm. Because the gray area is safe in the sense that like any moral decision that I make in the gray area is my own.
Yeah.
It's not necessarily good or bad, and it's in such a place where it's going to be hard for anybody else to judge me, because we all want to live our own truth instead of lean on ultimate truth.
Yeah.
So, but let's pop into the anatomy.
Yeah, I wanna hear about
of a
this.
sin. Yep. So he broke it down to 4 parts, and I went and grabbed a thesaurus so that because Isaac, I like alliteration. I think it's easier to remember things in that way. So these are the anatomy to sin. It's the 4 Ds is what we've broken it down into. The first is deception. So the reason that deception is the first one is because we have to think at some point, and it's typically in the very beginning, that whatever we are going after is better than what we have.
Yeah.
This area of James talks a lot about blessing. Blessed is the one who endures trials. And what is it? Who endures trials of many kinds. When we look at the Beatitudes, blessed is the person who does this, this, this. And we're always kind of chasing that blessing. Like, what do we have to do in order to live the blessed life or to be blessed by God and those types of things? And one of the very first things that we're told to do is to resist temptation and the devil, right? So being able to identify that. So the very first thing is deception, and it talks about here that each person is tempted when we are drawn away and enticed by our own evil desires. So there's the deception piece of it, that is whatever we're looking at, we start to question whether or not that is better for us. And the deception, if we were to look at like original sin, go back to Genesis 3, right? It starts with the enemy, it starts with the serpent asking the question, did God really say?
Did he really say that? Yeah.
Yeah. So, but the question that he asks is completely different than what God actually says. And this is, I think, something that a lot of people miss, is that the serpent asks, not did God say you can't eat of the fruit of the tree in the middle of the garden? He goes, did God really say you can't have any you can't eat the fruits of any of these trees. And I want to read it exactly because he's so clever in the way that he says it. And that's why it's, they set it up as like the serpent was more crafty than any of the other creatures, because he does it in such a way that you almost don't notice the subtlety of the wrong that's in there. Did God really say you can't eat from any tree in the garden? No, he didn't say that. But he absolutely didn't say that. But this is where the deception starts. Well, did God really say you can't do any of this? Did God really say that all of this is bad?
Yeah.
And then, no. So you have this deception that starts here with a misrepresentation of what God actually says. And when we look at so often the sins in our lives, is that is what it starts with, is this question, well, did God really, does Scripture really say that this is bad? Did God really say that this is not right? And it's this first step to like lowering our guard to whatever that temptation or whatever that sin is going to be. So it starts with the deception. Did God really say that? And the second is oftentimes that we're drawn away, and that drawn away is because something has either become attractive or misunderstood. And so when we look at what Eve says, Eve says, Eve says, we may eat the fruit from the trees in the garden, but about the fruit of the tree in the middle of the garden, God said, you must not eat it or touch it or you will die.
Yeah.
Well, that's also not true, right? God said, don't eat it or you will die. But Eve adds the touch it. And so there is this deception, and then there's a misconception, and that misconception is what draws us away. There's that lure and that attraction that's been put there, and now we're being drawn away because now he's like, you won't die if you touch it.
Yeah.
Like you're definitely not going to die. God's worried that your eyes are going to be open and that you're going to be like him.
Yeah.
And so then there's that draw, right? So it starts with a deception, and that deception causes us to question how we believe about a certain thing, and then our misinterpretations that are part of that oftentimes push us to that next level. And so many of those misinterpretations have to do with well-intentioned fences and hedges that we've kind of put around things, right? Yep. One of the big things is teetotaling, and that's not to say that I have any particular stance on drinking, good, bad, or indifferent, right? But the idea is that if you are not supposed to get drunk, that the best thing to do then is to not drink, because if you don't drink, then you don't get drunk. And if you aren't around alcohol, then you won't drink and then you won't get drunk. And so much so that what happens is anybody that drinks now in certain circles becomes, and this was a huge thing during particularly the middle parts of the 20th century within a lot of like heavily conservative circles, is religiously conservative circles, I'll put it that way, is that if you knew somebody that drank, they were a bad person because that meant that they were given over to drunkenness. Well, that wasn't necessarily the case. Those two things aren't, like paired up in every way, shape, form, and fashion. Obviously, as adults, we know that. And this is one of those deals, though, that all of the mechanisms that we put in place to protect us from this one sin are actually what are now driving the forces for us to be deceived into thinking that we're better than this other person because they do have a drink, and because they drink, which now puffs us up in our own self-righteousness, and whether or not they drink and get drunk is between them and God, but whether or not we have now puffed ourselves up in our own self-righteousness and pride, which has caused us to sin, we never come to that because we've been deceived by the fences that we've kind of put around it. So that said, that's the first thing. So it's deception, and then that deception draws us for some reason, because there is often some type of benefit with the person who is self-righteous in their conviction. The draw is that I feel better because I am better than this other person because I'm not being tempted. In the garden, it was you will become like God, right? Which at the base level, both of those temptations that the self-righteous person and Eve are dealing with are the same.
Yeah.
Because it elevates you from the position that you're in over the others around you.
Yeah.
As soon as Eve eats of that apple, not only has she already been given a place of dominion and authority over the earth as part of, creation in God's likeness, but now she's actually going to be better than Adam for just a little bit because she's going to be a little bit more like God than what Adam is. And, in the same thing, we're more like God when we are pious and feeling self-righteous and all of those types of things. So you got the deception, you've got the draw. Step 3 is the act of disobedience. Yeah. And this is one of the things that, so disobedience is the third one. This is one of the things that right now I think culturally we're struggling with is where does sin or when does something become sin? Because when you look at, and we've talked about this a little bit, like my big focus for this year has been on like World War II. And as I'm reading all of these World War II books, I'm being drawn more and more into the ideas around the communist regimes in Russia and in China and in North Korea, because a lot of those were fallouts of World War II. Well, a lot of what happened at the beginning of World War II, particularly the rise of the German leader to power, has to do with his response to communism and those kinds of things. The reason that those have become particular areas of interest for me is because of the way that crime was pursued. That it wasn't like initially, if you committed a crime, then you were a criminal. Well, then it began to, if you were a group of people that were talking about committing a crime, y'all were all criminals. Well, eventually what it ended up is if you were a person who said something that sounded like it could be criminal, then you ended up in the gulag. And there's this idea of thought crime, and it's put forth there. We see it in Orwell's 1984. We're seeing a lot of some of those same things culturally. Where like if you even talk about this or you think about this, like your words are as violent if you were to hit me in the face, right? Not really. And we're moving ourselves in this direction to where, again, like disobedience or sin itself becomes something that's much more subjective. So the Beatitudes and the Sermon on the Mount would lend us to, in the eyes of the Lord, there are a lot of our thoughts as Christians or as followers of Christ that God sees those as sinful thoughts and that it is as bad for us to do those things as it would be otherwise. But if we acted on every thing that was there that we had, right? Like it would be different. If all of my thoughts were punishable offenses, then I would have been in prison for the rest of my life. Yep. When I was 16, the very first time I got cut off on a highway, right? Because I would have been like, oh, well, I'm going to just pit maneuver and send that dude off the bridge for cutting me off, right? So like those kinds of things, but the actual act of disobedience is what makes something sinful. We don't often just arrive there on its own. We're not so very often in a place where we're like, oh, you know what I'm going to do is I'm going to do this without thinking about it or anything like that. Our kids are, right? Like I'm having to teach Levi what it means to hit. He's doing it naturally. He'll smack the bejesus out of us. Mm-hmm. And he's just not thinking about it, right? Doesn't know how his body works, isn't really sure. He's trying to test reactions and all kinds of stuff. But as soon as I see that arm extend and those hips kind of shift, I'm like, no. Right? Or you get the open mouth kind of on your cheek and he's like, ah. I'm like, are you about to kiss me? Because I know you're not about to bite me right now because we don't bite, right? Yeah. Those types of things. It's not the same when we're adults. That disobedience is what follows because we're now acting on the deception and the draw, the allure and the attraction of sin. And then the final one is death, is that sin always leads to death. There is no way where our sin does not lead to death of some kind, whether it's death of relationship, whether it's spiritual death, or ultimately whether it is the curse that was put on the earth, that sin actually leads to death. And so this was something that is in just these what is it, 3 verses, 13, 14, 15, is really well laid out, right? Each person is tempted when he is drawn away, enticed by his own desires. And then when desire has conceived, it gives birth to sin. And when sin is fully grown, it gives birth to death. That all of those things are in there. And when you look at any sin that's in your life, whether it is a temptation that's been put in your way because of the enemy, whether it's something that is coming from within you, whether it's a combination of the two things, which I think is probably most often the case, that it follows in this same pattern. So recognizing this pattern, I think, is one of the things I took away yesterday. Is like, this is going to be key to getting those blessings and those things that we're looking for, because the ultimate blessed life is not like rich and happy and all of that stuff. The ultimate blessed life is the one that is righteous and honors God.
Yep. So I think that the drawn away part, there was something you talked about there about fences, and I talk about this sometimes, like in discipleship. So fences are like a good natural response as you take inventory of the things that cause you to stumble in your own life. Like, you should put up fences to keep you from sinning. So I'm just looking at Galatians 5:1. For freedom Christ has set us free. Stand firm, therefore. Do not submit again to a yoke of slavery. And then 13. For you were called to freedom, brothers. Only do not use your freedom as an opportunity for the flesh, but through love serve one another. I look at, there's this balance between the freedom that we have in Christ and like people walk and people use this as a excuse, I think, to kind of, get on the edge of falling into sin. Like, oh yeah, I can drink, Yeah. Just like you said, the teetotalers, like there's the other side of that too, which is I'm just going to dance around the edge of this pool and hope I don't slip in and fall in.
Right.
So an appropriate response is offense, but it's like a personal thing. It's a thing that you should feel, just like Paul says, all things are
permissible, but not everything is beneficial.
Beneficial, yeah. Not all things are like, you can do that, but is that going to help you in your walk? Is that going to help you stay away from falling into sin? No. So I think that the fence thing is a really good a good thing. I told you I was on staff at a church that kind of their policy with staff was like, hey, listen, what you do, in your own house, in your own home is one thing, but you, like being out at a restaurant, like we don't want you drinking alcohol in a restaurant because we don't want someone from the church to like see you and not know if it was. And I'm like, okay, I get that, And then part of me is kind of like, well, hey, like I can walk in my own freedom. I can make my own decisions. I'm not a drunkard if I have one beer at lunch with my family or something.
Right.
But sort of out of respect for the church and how it might potentially look, or just so that we could avoid any like questions about staff or whatever. I was like, I yielded to that, of course.
Right.
But I think that that's indicative of not the church there, but that idea happens sometimes in churches, but also in just people's lives, because of things they struggle with. They put a fence up, and then that fence becomes the new law to obey. And so then when you violate that fence, it's like, oh, dude, like you're having a drink. Like, what's up? It's because they've violated now the fence that you put up for yourself, so you don't fall into, because you struggle with
you're now imposing your expectations on others.
Yes.
Yeah.
And that's a hard thing to not do when you've set something up as like a really bad thing in your life. But it's so easy for us to do that, for us to create a fence, and then for the fence to be the new standard,
Right.
And I even noticed that like in my marriage. So like, setting stuff up, before being married to be like, hey, we need to avoid temptation in this area, and then when you get married, and then it's like, well, hey, that barrier is not there anymore. But now because you've made a habit of like
not
don't
doing
go past
something?
this fence. Yeah. Then it's like, man, then it's difficult to like,
It can create guilt in the relationship with
Yes,
something
yeah.
that now you have the freedom to do.
yes. Yeah. And I think, for me, like, so alcohol is one of those ones where I put up a fence because, I mean, I don't struggle with alcohol, but it's more of like a physical thing. Like I feel terrible if I have any alcohol, even though I don't think it's a sin to have a few drinks. And it's not only not a sin, actually, it's like something that God actually gave us to enjoy, which people don't know that, but that scripture says that, it's like we actually were given this as a kindness from God, just in the same way that he like wants us to feast and enjoy time together. And it's like, it's one thing we're like, just like sex, created within certain confines to be enjoyed. And when you abuse that or you go outside of that, it's perversion, it's sin. So, anyway, I really liked the fence thing because that will keep you, it's a personal conviction. Mm-hmm. And I think the Holy Spirit will give you discernment on what areas of your life you need to set up fences around, but you cannot hold other people to those fences. You need to allow them to operate in the freedom that Christ has given them.
Yeah, for sure. And like this is a big thing with the folks we work with in Celebrate Recovery, mm-hmm. right? Is I would never take an alcoholic to a bar, mm-hmm. and there's two reasons for that. One is because that's not a place that they would want to go. Yeah. And most people who have struggled with alcoholism, they're like, I'm just not going to a bar again, right? And if other people are going to go, then I'm just going to tell them, hey, we're not hanging out tonight. Yeah. Or, if it's somebody that I trust with, that struggle that I have to say, hey, listen, this isn't a healthy environment for me to be in. Is there another place we could go? Mm-hmm. And that's fine. But the flip side of it is that, for somebody who has the freedom to do that, it's important that we're cognizant of where other people are at in their walks.
Yes. Yeah.
Right. And that's a big thing in finding the balance. And so one of the things that we tell people at CR and that we teach in recovery is, listen, if somebody wants to go out to a bar and then, you say no that you can, or you explain to them why you can, mm-hmm. and they continue to do it, that's not a good place for you. Yeah. So don't go there. Right. It doesn't mean that you tell them no, but that you tell them they can't, rather, but that you have to say like, no, because I know as soon as I get in there, I'm going to see that everybody's having a fun time, or I'm going to assume that they are because, the music's loud and whatever. Like, who cares what everybody else is actually doing? It's the environment, right? That environment's going to trigger habits, and that like, oh, it's just one drink. Well, there's the deception. Yeah, exactly. Right? I remember what this used to feel like. There's the draw. Yep. Right. And so there's the next bit that, the disobedience and the death piece are within that, but it goes for everything. Yeah. Right. People that struggle with eating disorders, if it's gluttony that is what you struggle with, if it's overeating, you don't need to accept the invite to Golden Corral, right? It's just, or Ryan's or whatever, Chinese buffet that there is that's open. You need to not do that. And it's so difficult, I think, with drinking. Like, it's easy for people to recognize that and say, hey, you know what? I'm an alcoholic. I've struggled with alcoholism. Yeah. The stigma that was around that is no longer there, but it still exists in a lot of areas. Yeah. And so when you say, hey, listen, I've had some eating issues in my life. The buffet is probably not the best place for me. People are likely to be like, well, then just don't eat a ton. Like, what's the problem? Right. And we don't show that same type of empathy. Yeah. And by not expressing that same type of empathy, what we're doing now is like, now we're the ones that are, and this is that other kind of that third piece that we don't talk about is, being talked into bad situations by the people that are around you.
That's a really good, that is a great, that's a great point to bring up, because you, like, just the not causing a brother to stumble thing, like, you cannot,
100%.
Yeah, you have a responsibility to help other people uphold their convictions as well. So much so that even if, like, causing if eating meat causes a brother to stumble, like refrain from doing it. You know
Right.
what I mean?
Yeah.
So, but in the same way, it's like, I totally agree. Like, and it's, you see it all the time. It's like, hey man, can we not listen to this music? Like, can you change the music? It's like, bro, what's wrong? I mean, it's just a song, you know? It's
Right.
like, yeah, but you don't understand that music leads me down a certain path of thinking, which leads me down being tempted to act a certain way, or, you know, fall into a certain, you know, temptation or whatever it is. So, I mean, or movies, you know, or TV shows or any of those things. So I like this. And the anatomy of sin broken down from these verses. And it's cool that you use Genesis to kind of walk us through some imagery of that.
Well, I can't claim that was Pastor John.
Okay, I didn't know if he stayed in James when he went over to Genesis.
I've got over here Genesis 3
Sweet.
here in my notes, that he kind of walked that path through there, because it's so recognizable when you see it in somebody else.
Yep.
Like so many negative things are. Like it's so easy for me to recognize sin in other people because they're bad and I'm pretty good. Right? Like that's just the way that we think most of the time. Even if we want to deny it, even if we are a person who gives in to like thoughts of self-loathing, we're like, oh, I'm worthless and blah, blah, blah. Yeah. We'll also be quick to gossip about how bad somebody else is, because at our core, we're still pretty sure that we're pretty good.
Pretty good.
At least we're better than that person.
I like this. Well, not I like this, but I see this. Obviously, the word of God is true and profitable for teaching and rebuking. And,
that's a fair point.
Yeah. But I'll say that I see this absolutely in my own thought life here. Each person is tempted when he's lured and enticed by his own desire. So the desire is the first thing that gets you want to think about something, right? So I'll just use lust as an example, but it's like you see something, seeing it is not the sin.
Right.
Making the conscious decision to hold on to it and think about it. And then when that desire, it says when the desire has conceived, it gives birth to sin.
Yeah.
So it's like there's a gestational period of the desire. The desire is there. And I think that is the time, like, if you're going to nip it in the bud, that's the time. It's to kill. You recognize the desire for sin, or the desire for something to turn into sin. That's the moment that you're like, no. And for me, it has to be quick action. Like, and again, pertaining to lust specifically, it's like, I cannot linger on anything that will cause me to stumble. Like, that's where, when you're just dancing on the edge of the pool going like, I'm fine. You know, I'm not wet yet. I hadn't fallen in. Right. It's like, dude, but you are really close.
You get baby oil all over your feet.
Yeah. Get away from there. Get away from the edge of the pool completely. And so, anyway, I see this imagery is so, it's like, just as I study more, I've read this 1,000 times, like in James. I've read James a bunch of times. I've read this, the desire when it's conceived gives birth to sin. So how do we nip it in the bud? I think it's before that happens.
Yeah, it's like anything else, man. When you recognize the steps that you take in getting to a place, it's the same as changing any other behavior.
Yeah.
You know, there are some great books out there. The Power of Habit by Charles Duhigg, Atomic Habits by James Clear, which are, kind of in the same realm. We have all of these like incredible books that teach us about what it takes to do to change our negative habits or to create good habits or whatever. And so many of them start with like, all right, what's the cue? What's the response? What's the reward? Right? Mm-hmm. That's kind of the anatomy of a habit.
Yep.
Well, it's the same thing with sin. Like, what's the deception? Where is the draw? Where's the disobedience and the actual acting on the thing? And if we can learn to recognize those things, it's the exact same way that we would change a bad habit of like, oh, I want a cookie at 3:00. Mm-hmm. Well, do I really want a cookie? Am I bored? So am I hungry? Am I bored? Am I craving that like trip to the break room to have conversation? Yeah. which one of those things is it? Now I'm going to break those things apart to figure out like what it is.
Yep.
It's the same thing. We've got cues for our sins. And when those deceptions start, that's when we can learn to identify, is it that bored, lonely, angry, stressed, tired, that when we're in that place where we're like, doing this is not the worst thing I could be doing, or, it's better than just sitting here being bored, right? We're convincing ourselves that whatever that sin is that we're going to go after is better than being bored or lonely,
right.
This will actually solve my anger because it'll give me some relief, or it'll help me to de-stress if I do this. It'll actually, never considering that the shame or the guilt or whatever that we have at the end of that experience is actually going to
worse.
going to be worse than what we're experiencing.
Yeah.
So
I like the, so there is there's a spiritual component, and then there's like a physical component, because we are both of those things,
right.
Yeah. And so in the same way, I think that we have to be, there are spiritual matters. There's a spiritual component to these things that we do, but then there's also this very applicable and practical, pragmatic thing, like the mechanism, right? Mm-hmm. So yes, I don't think that you just pray and all of it's resolved completely and you never have temptation ever again. In fact, we're told all throughout Scripture that we're going to continue to struggle, but that we're not slaves to that. We're not slaves to sin. We're not stuck in that yoke of bondage anymore. We have freedom in Christ, but it's continual reliance on Him that helps us to get free. So what I'm saying is that thinking, like you said, the cue, the response, and the reward. The reward. So there are actionable things that you can set up, habits and strategies to help you to not sin. And I think that that's incredibly important, because again, you can't just rely on I'm just going to pray it away and it's done. It's like, no, God has given you a sound mind with logic to work out, okay, God, my commitment to you is when I experience this response that I know in the past has caused me this cue, which causes me to respond this certain way, which causes sin, ultimately leads to sin. My commitment, God, is to start looking away if this is the temptation, or a song comes on and it reminds me of whatever, it makes me, people hear music and they're like, man, so I get in a party mood. I just want to party, I want to hang out. I want to drink or whatever. It's okay. We'll avoid the music. So that's there's an actionable step that you can take to help you avoid sin. And this kind of goes back to the fence thing that we were talking about. But I think so many people just they don't know that they can, yes, God can deliver you from things and from desires completely. He can replace desires. He can give you new desires in your heart. But very often what He does is He gives you the tools you need to set up habits and strategies, and just, what would you call it? A strategy. Yeah. A strategy to defeat sin or to overcome sin. And it starts with reliance on Him, but then there's also actionable steps that you can take. You need to, again, personal responsibility,
Personal responsibility is a huge one, right? Yeah. Recognition of these steps is also a big one. And, one of the things that I always go to is when people are like, well, okay, so when I'm at this part, when I'm thinking about doing this, right, is it me or is it the enemy? And the thing that I always go to is, does it matter?
Yeah, yeah.
Right? If you know that it's going to lead you to do something that you shouldn't be doing, does it matter where the temptation is coming from?
Right.
Does it matter if it's your own evil desires or if it is, some spirit that's on you? Ultimately, no. Right? And so, your first line of defense is always prayer. People think about prayer so often it's not only an afterthought, but it's a last resort instead of our first response. I think is a phrase that a lot of people have used, but that we think about prayer in the I do this when I need something from God, instead of I do this because I want to build my relationship with God. And the piece of it that is so often missing, I think, is that prayer is the answer. Before you get to the action phase or any of that stuff, prayer is the number one thing that we ought to be doing, because that is where we are most open to the Holy Spirit affecting the things that are happening in our mind and in our heart.
Right.
And
chiefly our desires.
Yeah, absolutely.
Giving us new desires. Yeah.
Getting that alignment first thing in the morning is such an important thing for us. And it doesn't mean that, there's a lot of folks that are like, well, I don't have, 20 minutes to have a quiet time, or an hour to have a quiet time, or 10 minutes to have a quiet time, or whatever, devotion time in the morning. Sorry, Stephen. But the truth is, like, I've got time to pray.
Yeah.
I've got 60 seconds. I've got, 2 minutes to pray. I've got the entire drive to work, where I can be praying, whether that's, a 5-minute drive or a 25-minute drive, or a 90-minute drive, whatever, to get that alignment there. And we don't think about prayer as an action, but it is. And it's got to be the first one, because we can cut off the deception. We can cut off the draw at the beginning before those things are allowed to happen.
And enticing.
We partner with God to bring us to a place where, we become aware, and just ask for awareness. Yeah. Hey, if I start to get deceived today, bring me awareness. That's the Lord's Prayer, right? Yeah. What is it? Lead us not into temptation,
but deliver us.
Yeah. That's it. It's guard our minds, guard our hearts against those things, so that we can recognize them.
Romans, and I shared this in an early episode. It's one of my favorite verses, but it's Romans 8:6, and it says, "A mind that is set on the flesh is death, but a mind that is set on the spirit is life and peace." And so I think there's a conscious, we can make a conscious effort to ask the Holy Spirit for us to have, the mind of Christ, but to have our minds set on the things of the Spirit and not on the things of the flesh, so that we aren't drawn into that. We aren't enticed. We don't fall into temptation or deception. And so, like you said, but it starts with prayer, starts with a plea to God to help you down the path of right thinking, to avoid temptation, and for God to deliver you from those thoughts and those habits, and not falling into the snares of the enemy. So
yeah, prayer is a big one. Sticking in the Word is a big one, and then seeking that partnership with other believers to talk about it. Right, like, hey, you know what? This is something that I've noticed is happening for a few days, or that today's been really heavy on me, or a few weeks I've been like flirting with this idea. I'm gonna call a friend of mine who's a believer. I'm gonna shoot him a message and just say, hey, if you got a minute, let's chat, or hey, can you pray with me about this, or can you pray for me about something, or whatever. And the Holy Spirit works in incredible ways that a lot of times when we're going through those types of things, we'll get a text message from somebody that's like, hey, how can I pray for you? Man. And instead of being, prideful and saying, no, things are good, just be like, you know what? There's some things that I'm struggling with right now. I don't want to go into detail of all of it, but God knows. And so if He's put me on your heart today, then be praying with me about that. The most important takeaway from this that I've had, and that we want to make sure that you've got, is that we have the ability to recognize sin in its utero stages.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah.
At the moment of conception. And when we do that, when we partner with the Holy Spirit, then not only are we able to avoid the temptation, but we're able to snuff it out before it actually even becomes tempting.
Yep.
And then, partner with the Holy Spirit to identify those things, to help you to see sin in the earlier stages. Yeah. And then for those of us who are looking at the temptations and things that our friends have, and we may think that they're ridiculous, whether it's music or going to a certain place or whatever, instead of trying to convince them to do something that's going to put them in a compromising position, just honor them for the steps that they're trying to make. Yeah. Right. Many of us that are in the, combat sports world, or Jiu-Jitsu, or, have been in the fitness world for a long time, if I know my friend is trying to make weight for something, I'm going to slap that piece of cake out of his hand.
100%.
Right. I'm not going to tell him at my kid's birthday, but like, well, you can have one bite if I know you've got to make weight. I'm not going to do that, because I'm going to respect the decisions that you've made. I'm going to honor that. It should be the same thing in our spiritual
100%.
lives, as it when, we've got somebody that's saying, hey, listen, I can't listen to this, or, this, that, and the other, I can't go to this type of place. So that's really not what I'm doing. Like, it's fine to make a concession, to keep your brother from stumbling, it's going to be better. And if you are bitter about the fact that like, oh, I didn't get to go and do this thing, then that's a pretty good indication that you need a heart check.
Yeah.
If you're so dead set on like, no, I've got to go have a drink tonight, and I'm going with my buddy that, or my friend invited somebody who's a former alcoholic, and now we can't go, and now I'm upset that I can't have a drink. Well, you may need to stop drinking for a little while.
Yeah, right.
You might need to eliminate this thing from your life because it's obvious that this is becoming a stronghold for the enemy, and kick that stuff out. So yeah, man.
I think so. Just one thing I want to emphasize. You said it, but I want to make it a strong point. Is essentially your willingness to be vulnerable. So, and I've talked about this a little bit. My wife is a professional counselor, a psychotherapist, and she can only help people to the extent that they're willing to be vulnerable with her. And the same thing goes to every person that's listening to this right now, your brothers and your sisters. I mean, the Holy Spirit does illuminate things to people, but typically not in the depth of detail that they need to really speak into your situation. And so if someone is prompted, or even just you, like feeling like you need to talk to somebody, the enemy is going to try to convince you, is going to dissuade you, like try to dissuade you from sharing, but what are they going to think about you? And, what if they react, what if they don't react how you want them to, or whatever. And a lot of times it's just because that shame and sin doesn't want to be exposed and wants to hide itself and protect itself. And the best way it can is just to kind of keep itself in the dark. But when you're willing to drag that stuff into the light and have that conversation with people and be vulnerable, you can get that stuff completely out, So my encouragement to everybody is to like find someone you can trust and share with them. Like, and don't try to protect your ego, protect yourself from the potential shame, because the Bible talks about there's healing to talk to one another about, to confess our sins to one another, and we might be healed through that. So.
Yeah, man, and be praying for the folks over at Via Church as they're getting ready to plant. They're looking for a couple of young families to help jumpstart their kids ministry, so that when they plant, they've got a kids ministry rolling that they can build off of. And with their send model, it's going to be a challenge, like setting out with, we want to create a strong church with the intention of ministering to college students, knowing we're going to have them temporarily, knowing we're going to be walking through a mess with them, so that we can send them out to be healthy members of the body of Christ that minister to others. So be praying for Pastor John and his team. Well, if you want to close us in prayer, man.
Yes. Heavenly Father, we love you. I thank you for your word. We thank you for truth, and God, for the way that just studying your word, even just a couple verses like this, just enriches in our lives so much and equips us with insight and wisdom to now avoid temptation and steer away from sin, God, and steer away from the things that take us away from you. I just love you for that, for giving us this wisdom and truth this morning. Lord, I pray for all of our listeners that are out there, God, that you would just, you'd be with them. You would encourage them, God, that they would feel your presence with them. We know you are with each of us, God, but I just pray for a heightened awareness of your presence in our lives, and to see your hand working. You are always working all things together for the good of those that love you and are called according to your will. God, I just pray that you would help us to see you working in everything. Lord, I pray a blessing over all the families and the jobs of the people that listen to this podcast, their jiu-jitsu gyms. And we love you. We put our hope and our trust in you. You are trustworthy, and you're good and faithful, God. Even when we are faithless, you're faithful to us. And so we love you for that. And we pray your blessing, protection over everyone that listens to this podcast. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.
Amen. Well, this has been Jesus and Jiu-Jitsu. We ought to talk about this Saturday. Yeah, before we close it out.
Yep.
Give us the rundown.
October 5th, this Saturday.
Cinco de
This
Diez.
Saturday. Eastside Dojo.
Yeah.
12:30 p.m. So 12:30 at Eastside Dojo in
It's
Plano,
12:30?
Texas. Yeah.
12:30 start time. Okay.
Yeah.
Nice.
It's normally earlier than
Yeah,
that,
it is,
but
yeah.
they have a judo class that's going on before that. So, yeah.
Whatever.
12:30 and Joao Gabriel Rocha, world-renowned jiu-jitsu competitor and coach, is going to be teaching the free seminar. So the event is free. It's always free, and anyone is welcome. You don't have to register. Just bring somebody. Show up a little bit early so you can get signed up, get the waivers and everything signed, and free Jocko Go and hydrate, and it'll be an awesome time. I mean, there'll be amazing. It'll be an amazing group of believers, people that love God. We'll have a great speaker, and then we'll roll. So come out, man. I hope you guys are able to make it. And
is Guy speaking at this one?
Yeah.
Yeah. So the guy who's speaking is named Guy, but former NFL offensive lineman and pastor now.
Yep.
Stellar dude. Spent a lot of years as an evangelist.
Yeah.
So he's huge. I guess he's not as big as he used to be.
No.
He's more diminutive than he used to be.
Yeah, he's lost a bunch of weight.
Yeah. But he's still really loud because he's from New Jersey.
From New Jersey.
Anyway, but it'll be a good time with some great instruction and a good dude bringing the word. So
Tap Cancer Out will be there as well.
Oh yeah, that's right.
To share with everybody a little bit about their mission. Joao Gabriel Rocha was, he's a cancer survivor, and so it's very near and dear to his heart. So we absolutely, we said, we'd love to have them out there and represent. So it'll be a great time, and we'll also have merch. We'll have rash guards, we'll have t-shirts, decals, we'll have coffee.
Maybe a little something special from Origin.
Yeah.
To get some things going.
Yeah.
We'll see. We're working out that right now. If it doesn't happen, we'll always wish it would have.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It'll be such an amazing time. So y'all come out 12:30 Eastside Dojo in Plano. Joao Gabriel Rocha. Let's go.
Check it out. Well, this has been Jesus in Jiu-Jitsu number 082.
Go train.
Yeah, do it. Go train.